If mental illness is the reason the crime is committed, should the perpetrator still be tried as guilty? Senator Sam Blakeslee says yes to that. In quotes, he said, "You've got people who have been determined to be so mentally compromised that they're not guilty by reason of insanity or incompetent to stand trial. This legislation would not apply to those individuals." The legislation he's referring to is that if you are mentally disabled to perform a crime, then you will be let off the hook and put in a mentally insane institute until you are healed. And what he's saying is that there are certain people who know that they have mental disability, so they know that they can always rely on that and claim that the disability made them perform the crime whenever they're using that as basically a scapegoat to get out of what they did. Also, individuals with mental illnesses can commit a crime, be fully aware of it, yet claim that made them lose their mind. It's a slippery slope. No one can ever be completely sure when it is the illness or the person who's committing the crime, so they should still be tried as criminals nonetheless. Also, after being tried, how should a mentally insane individual be treated? As I stated earlier, the Department of Mental Health has an ETU, an Enhanced Treatment Unit for the mentally insane. The ETU unit will let the person still be in prison, yet they'll be treated more closely and be monitored more than the average inmate. This is something that needs to be expanded because in California, where they use this program, only 27 inmates can be in the ETU. And for such a unit to work more efficiently, it will have to be expanded, more workers will have to be hired for that, and we'll have to get a budget for the program. Overall, I believe mentally insane individuals should still be tried as criminals regardless of their mental state. Thank you for your time, and I enjoyed this debate.
Currently in society, the mentally ill are not treated correctly to be placed in normal jails. And while you were saying that we could redirect taxes and utilize more money to create these ETUs, I believe that as we've seen in the past, the government doesn't necessarily want to provide for the criminals of our society. The government doesn't even want to provide for the normal people who are living their everyday lives correctly. For instance, the government is trying to shut down Social Security. So why would they want to cut funding for the old, but increase funding for the criminals? And additionally, the United States has decreased their level of care for the mentally ill, which could be causing these increased jails build-up of the mentally ill. For instance, between 1982 and 2001, the number of public hospital beds available for the mentally ill decreased by 69%. So, overall, many in prison could be elsewhere with proper treatment. Additionally, not guilty by reasons of insanity, which you were discussing, which would be the get out of jail free card, for instance, is very rare. It's only 0.25% of jail cases. So the majority of people do have to go serve their time. Additionally, the mentally ill do not receive correct treatment in prison. They need to create more facilities to create them, to provide. While you said ETU could be created for a prison with punishment for criminals, as you also noted, there's not much funding for it, so they're not able to utilize this facility. It said only 27 inmates could be placed in there, but there were 1.3 million inmates with mental illness. So we need a lot more of them if that were going to be a reasonable idea. And this lack of treatment has caused a cycle of incarceration where it just becomes a loop of jail and then setting them free, and more crimes, and then jailed back again. And the cost of helping them, if we were just to create the proper facilities, would actually be significantly less than just incarcerating them. So overall, mentally ill should not be treated as criminals, but instead they should be treated as patients who can be helped to become better members of society.
You stated that still, after a crime is committed, that the individual should be treated and could ultimately be put back in society. If they are put back in society, how can you exactly tell that they will not go out and do this again. The answer is you cannot prove this. That's why if someone with a mental impairment commits a crime that would be punishable by life in prison, they should spend life in prison in an enhanced treatment unit or in a mental facility. Even if they're in a facility and treated, that would be okay as long as they're in there for the time that the average person would be. You can't release murderers back to society because you never know, even if it was the illness, you're going to never know when that could snap again. Or if they've done this, they're not going to let a normal person back out because they never know if they're just going to do it again and claiming that they're better now. You can't really differentiate between whether they're healthy or not. So they would still have to serve their time properly. Also, you stated about the government funding. For funding for this, you could get levies and use taxes more properly, because obviously we know that tax money goes to things that it shouldn't. It's wasted on other things. So if you took money and put it towards something like this, it would be a lot better. You wouldn't even exactly have to put much funding into this as long as you had, you could train, like increase the amount of training you would have to have before you could be a prison guard, and make sure that all prison guards would be capable of operating an enhanced treatment unit. That way they would be getting the same pay, or maybe a little bit more pay for this, yet they wouldn't have to pay too much for someone completely special. They could all be trained for this. That way it's a well-rounded type of thing. Overall, I don't think that mentally impaired people, after committing a crime that is punishable by life in prison or by execution, should ever be put back to society. Also, if they're in a state where they can be executed, I believe they should still be executed as well. They shouldn't really be treated any differently than the average person when committing such a crime, because they're more unstable than the average person. You can never trust them to get back out, so there's not really much of a point in wasting money on keeping them alive whenever you would do the same thing by executing someone else.
Hello, my name is Charlie Neufeld, and I will be arguing the negative side of mentally ill, insane criminals being charged as criminals. Now, pleading insanity in a court case could result in the defense of guilty by reason of pleading not guilty by reason of insanity, which would be admitting to committing the crime, but neither legally nor morally guilty if insane when committing the crime. To prove the insanity to the court, defendants would need to prove that they did not comprehend their actions, could not tell right from wrong, or acted on an impulse that was uncontrollable. And there are a variety of tests they can do to test this. Now, successful pleas send defendants to psychiatric hospitals until deemed not a threat to society. And with this in-depth process that must be proved to get them off the hook, as you were saying, because they are mentally ill, this only occurs 0.25% of court cases in the U.S. judicial system. Just that minute amount end in not guilty by reason of insanity. Although over half of all in jail or in prison have mental issues. Now, mentally ill do not truly receive this correct treatment that they need in prison. While you were saying in California they have this ECU, but you also noted that only 27 inmates are able to be in it, which shows that the government does not want to provide correct funding for it. They just want to provide the lowest amount possible to show that they try a little. Well, also, only 60% receive mental health treatment while they are incarcerated. So, while they do provide some treatment in just the regular jails, not that many receive it. And only 2/3 of the inmates who receive counseling or psychotropic medications were in facilities that did not specialize in providing mental health services in confinement. So while there's a large amount that do receive it, they're not actually receiving treatment from the people who should be treating them in a place that is appropriate for this act. Additionally, the prisons can't even regulate whether or not the inmates are taking their medication. So no matter how good of treatment they're giving, if the inmates don't even take the medication and the prison people cannot even force them to, there will be no help. And this lack of treatment can cause a cycle of incarceration. For instance, half of the mentally ill inmates reported having 3 or more prior sentences. So not only are they mentally ill and being incarcerated and not treated, but then because they aren't treated correctly, they go back into society and commit more crimes, go back to jail, aren't treated, go back to society and commit another crime. So the punishment aspect is not working for these mentally ill criminals. They need to be treated so that way they can go back and become productive members of society rather than just hurting society and becoming a pain in the government and having to divert funding into that. And speaking of the monetary value, in Michigan, for instance, the annual cost of case management for mentally ill is just over $2,000, and more intensive programs are over $9,000. But on the other hand, the average Michigan inmate costs over $34,000 per year. So if they just treated the people correctly, treated the mentally ill people, it would actually be less expensive for the government than if they were to send them to jail. Okay, thank you. I now stand for question.
Okay, at the start of your statement, you were claiming how things are right now. You weren't exactly stating your beliefs on the matter. You stated how it is now, but what I was doing was saying how I believe it should be. You said that currently the government doesn't fund, but they should. Do you think the government should start to fund such a thing, or do you think that they should back off and focus more on only treatment?
I believe they should create more ways to treat the patients, treat them as patients, and not try and persecute them and incarcerate them.
If a mentally insane individual commits mass murder, do you think that they should ever be able to be back in society, whether they are treated or not?
I believe that if the mental illness is blocking them from becoming a productive member of society, and they are committing crimes because they cannot understand and comprehend what is right and wrong in society, then they need to be treated. And if this illness is so bad that they cannot become productive members of society, then they don't just go become treated off, but they would have to stay in treatment for a long period of time. So they would be, in a sense, spending their time that they have to, but instead of being in prison, incarcerated for this extended period of time for their sentence, they're just be treated for a long period of time in a facility that is capable of doing so.
Obviously, as I was speaking of mass murder, if someone without a mentally impairment commits mass murder, they're either going to be in prison for life if they're in a state without the death penalty, or if they're in a state with the death penalty, they will be executed. Do you think that someone with a mental illness such as Asperger's, like the guy who performed the Newtown shooting, if he had not killed himself and had actually been arrested, do you think that he should have been executed or put in prison or mental insane asylum for his life? Do you think he should have served a life sentence or execution?
Well, if his mental illness caused him to do these actions and blocked him from understanding what was right and wrong, and that it was actually wrong to do these actions, then he should be treated for an extended period of time. And this extended period of time this would probably be a long time of treatment, because his illness seems to be very severe.
How can you tell that it was exactly the illness that made him do this? Because Asperger's is a high-functioning form of autism, so you can still function in society with Asperger's.
If the illness did not cause him to commit these crimes, then he will not be treated and he will be sent to a jail, and he may receive some minor treatment for the illness, but in jail, but he does not get to go to a hospital and try and be treated if the illness did not block his understanding of right and wrong, and he committed it because he thought that's what he wanted to do, and not anything to do with his illness.
Thank you for answering my questions. stupid stuff too.
Okay, ready?
Please stand there. If you move, I'm
Are
gonna
the
kick
mentally
you
ill
back.
are the mentally ill criminals stable enough to be placed in jail?
I don't think they're stable enough to be placed in jail without the ETU unit, the enhanced treatment unit that I discussed. But what the ETU unit does, as I stated, was it combines punishment with treatment, and that's exactly what they need because they couldn't function on their own. Say you had a mentally insane person in a cell by themselves, they would just go crazy in there. They can't really function properly, so that's why you need the extra treatment, the advanced workers to help them.
Nice. Would governments be enticed enough to actually want to help mentally insane criminals and provide more funding for them?
I think that they should, yes. It's because we need such a program as this. Mentally insane people can't just get off the hook for what they do because of an illness. There's always loopholes because they can claim it was the disease that made them do it when it really wasn't. You can't exactly tell. So if you had them in the ETU unit of a prison or a jail, they would still receive punishment while receiving treatment. And as I stated, in California, they can only have 27 inmates in the ETU unit. So it's a program that needs to be developed for something like this to work. It needs to be more developed. It needs funding.
Well, it needs funding, but though would the government actually provide funding for it? Because based on current records, government does not usually try for what they should do. They more do what they think they need to do or want to do instead.
I agree with that. I don't think the government would necessarily want to. I think it would be a struggle to get them to provide for such a thing. But they should. Does the government always do what they should? No, of course not. But I believe they should. And would they necessarily do this? I can't answer for you because I'm not them. I'm just saying that I think it should happen. I think if we had the right people and enough support through Congress, and we had our state representatives back this more, I firmly believe that it could be passed.
Go.
Hi, my name is Wyatt McCabe, and I'm speaking for the affirmative, stating that mentally insane individuals should still be tried as criminals regardless of their mental state. I agree that they should be treated if they are mentally disabled, but I still believe they should be in prison. There's such a thing called an EDU, an ETU, and it is an enhanced treatment unit. The Department of Health has created this unit for the mentally insane, and it allows for mentally insane individuals to be in prison yet under a certain unit, the ETU, and they're more advanced staff, and they're treated and watched more closely so they do not do anything they shouldn't, but at the same time they're being given treatment that they need, yet still punished. And I think this is exactly what we need, yet such a program hasn't been completely developed. In California, they use the ETU, and only 27 inmates can be in the ETU due to the fact that it hasn't got extremely large yet, and the workers for that have to be volunteer. So they can't make a prison worker work in the ETU because of this, but they can only volunteer. I'd like to also state a quote by John De Morales. He's the director of California's state hospital, and he stated that there are criminals who happen to exhibit symptoms of a mental disorder, and there are mentally ill people who happen to have committed crimes. They all end up in the same place. I agree with this. Well, obviously, they should end up in the same place. I don't believe that a mentally insane criminal should be put in a mental institution because you never know what they can do there as well. They need to be locked down and treated as a criminal as well as mentally insane. And there are ways to go about this, such as the ETU. It just needs to be more developed and things like that. We just have to expand and get more of an outreach to people like this.